Hello and welcome to We Need a Village Again, WNAVA, our 2025 virtual Black History podcast. We've entitled it Honoring Our History, Leveraging Our Legacy to Reshape Our Future. And we're so glad you're here. I'm Charlene Glover, the founder and CEO of WNAVA, a social justice Christian organization, and your host for the Black History podcast. At WNAVA, we're motivated by a divine vision to champion justice, educate, and empower change makers, and to lift up the underprivileged and the marginalized. Our mission is to be a voice to and for the voiceless, a bridge to opportunities and force for generational transformation. We feel for us a call to action is found in Psalm 82, verse 3 through 4. Give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and destitute. Rescue the poor and helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. So our social justice ministry and Black History podcast is all about lifting up those that need a voice and to be empowered to use their voice, as well as to advocate for justice and equity and equality for all people. WNAVA exists because our children deserve a future. We are there to nurture, educate, and celebrate them. We also believe that our parents and caregivers deserve supportive networks to navigate life's challenges. Our elders deserve respect and inclusion, and every individual in our community deserves the opportunity to thrive. So we're committed to the well-being of those that we can touch. Although some may miss Black history and others may downplay it and discount it, Black history is significant. It is not only Black history, but it is an undeniable, lasting, impactful, world-changing event that happened in the past and continues to live on in the future. Black history is American history. It's world history. Black History Month is a time that we set aside to honor the legends and the unsung heroes, leaders, innovators, inventors, abolitionists, and civil rights activists who paved the way for freedom, justice, and equality. It is upon their shoulders we stand, and we're inspired by their relentless faith to continue the fight and to advance for justice and equity for all people. We commit to honoring their sacrifices, contributions, and that legacy that they've handed down by building forward. Is with this conviction that we have curated this Black History program and the podcast, honoring our history, leveraging our legacy to reshape our future. We've done so to bring information and education to you, to challenge you to continue to push forward for meaningful change today and for our future generations. So thank you for tuning in. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. And if you're continuing this journey with us, we're glad to have you back with us for this game-changing Black History podcast. Now, today we have a special guest that I'll be introducing, and we'll be focusing in on a critical and timely subject that is becoming increasingly necessary in the Black community. That is Black mental health and wellness. We have with us Dr. J. But before we introduce Dr. J to our platform, would you take a moment and watch a quick video with me that is going to be awe-inspiring to understand things that are happening behind the scenes that may be affecting you every day? Would you just take a moment and let's take a look at this video.
So I must thank the Critical Collective again for inviting me. I thought they never would after the last bad thing that I said. I must have upset lots of people, I'm sure. Every time I make a presentation, I upset lots of people, but never the Critical Collective, so we must be thinking alike. I congratulate them, really. It's amazing to see so many people here. And I also congratulate scholars for linking again with Critical Collective. It's been some time, and I hope this partnership continues and flourishes, because this is just amazing to see the number of people. I have to apologize for two things. The first is, I have to apologize in advance. I'm not an expert on Africa. What I'm going to offer you, perhaps it's not enough, but it's some commonsensical observations. I hope it's common sense. But sometimes it's better not to be an expert, you know, to be able to see things from slightly afar. The second thing is, I'm wearing the wrong trousers. I was fixing my bike, so I wore my old trousers, and so please don't video this part, because my wife will immediately divorce me. Okay, so what I'm going to try and do is just give you some charts and a couple of tables, just to paint a little bit of a picture that you already know. Okay, so what this presentation is fundamentally designed to say is this. Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US or now China, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America and Asia is going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay, so this is what it's fundamentally about. What I want to show you is how these structures are operating. It's just 20 minutes, so we can't do very much, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. And why I keep the ideology part there is because we are part of the producers of ideology. At universities and academic institutions, we are complicit in this whole enterprise. Okay, so the job of many Western academics is to convince Africans they have to keep doing what they're doing. Okay, and to show them it's your fault that you're poor. It's not our fault. It's your fault that you're poor. You know, so this is what we do in academic institutions, and I want to show that as well.
Okay, so if you paid attention to that, Sub-Saharan Africa includes Central, East, South, and Western Africa. So it crosses the continent of Africa. This is a professor, Dr. Howard Nicholas, who is a Sri Lanka economist and social scientist. He's a senior lecturer in economics at the International Institute of Social Studies in the Netherlands. So imagine if this is the ideology that is being propagated through universities, then there are people that already have a mindset about Africans, African Americans, and Black people. So when people say, why can't Black people just get over slavery? Why can't they just get over their past? Why can't they just simply move on? It's because we're constantly exposed, either overtly or covertly, to behaviors and events that re-inflict us with generational trauma, on a daily basis almost. So we can't get over something that tends to be pervasive and in our face day after day and generation after generation. But the good news is a passage in the Bible, 3 John 1 2 says, 3 John 2 says, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. So it is the will of God that we prosper, spirit, soul, and body. And I believe that sometimes that means we have to have people help us identify, recognize, identify, and address perhaps issues that we have been inflicted with pain, trauma, generational, culturally, so that we can address those things. So when that happens, we're able to now come to resolve or at least take some ownership of what's happening to us. Unfortunately, his presentation is germane to African Americans, Black people, and Africans. So there are things that we sometimes address or need to address, or that that's put upon us, we're encumbered with, that other people groups may not have to experience. We're resilient and we're brilliant, and we're just dogged, determined to advance. But we also need to understand there is a reality that is at work against us. We have with us to help unpack this, also to help you identify and relieve yourself of some of these stressors, Dr. Jay Barnett. Dr. Jay Barnett, I want to welcome you to our stage. Thank you for being a part of our Black History podcast. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for having me, Pastor Charlene. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation, a great opportunity to share in-depth insight with what you've already have kind of created the space on what we face, having to be constantly reminded of where we come from, and then to consistently be attached to the traumatic experiences that took place with slavery and so many other things that started in Africa, that is very much ingrained into American culture as well.
Exactly. And my pretext with you early on, I am confident that you're going to add value to our listeners. You're also going to add value to help them identify things and perhaps walk away with some practical ways to relieve their consciousness and their subconsciousness of some of perhaps the pain or the affliction that they may have encountered. Let me tell our audience about you. Dr. Jay Barnett is an esteemed author, dynamic speaker, and widely acknowledged expert in mental health. Now, more than ever, he's making an incredible mark in his field with his impactful storytelling, innovative strategies, and insightful lessons. In his mental health access mission, he focuses on underserved communities and youth development. A former professional football player, Dr. J integrates the principles of athletic discipline into his clinical work, fostering a winning mindset. He is a member of the Kappa Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated. He has appeared on NBC Hoda Jenna, The Breakfast Club, Sherry Shepherd, the Black Enterprise and the Black Enterprise magazine. In 2023 and 2024, he was the Grand Marshal for the American Psychiatric Association More Equity Initiative, leading efforts to establish fair access to mental health services. Dr. J's literary contributions are a mirror of his life's work. His books are heartfelt, enlightening, and deeply rooted in his passion for mental health and youth advocacy. Whether you're seeking guidance, understanding, or a fresh perspective on mental health, Dr. J's collection caters to a spectrum of readers. From in-depth analysis to relatable anecdotes, there is a book for everyone. Dr. J, welcome. Thank you. Your mantra is life is about who you are becoming, not about what you get. Now that's a mouthful, because when people understand it's about becoming and not getting, becoming and not achieving first, we can find some life balance and some soul health, I believe. Thank
Yeah,
you. I
yeah.
want to welcome you, and I want to also just give you an opportunity to tell a little bit about your story, your personal story, and what motivated you toward mental health. And then we'll dive into some questions and dialogue so that we can perhaps speak to our audience in a real and practical way.
Yes, yes. I've been in the mental health space for about 10 years. I got started around about 32, 33 after my second suicide attempt. And I've, shared my story on many platforms, churches, organizations, conferences, and just kind of sharing the story of how not healing something that happened during my adolescent years as a teenager, which was dealing with the divorce of my parents that caused abandonment, rejection, and neglect, and all these different things, which at that time I didn't know it was depression and why I began withdrawing myself. And football for me was a place to hide. It was a safe haven. And I think many boys, particularly Black boys, sort of find comfort and kind of find a sense of belonging when it comes to sports. And if you don't have a father figure or any males, coaches become fathers to you. Coaches become mentors. And so those were spaces that I've really found acceptance because my father, when he divorced my mother, he pretty much divorced the family. So just to fast forward, after football came to an end for me, I just felt lost. And after being cut the first time, I attempted a suicide, which is my first attempt was a cutting incident because I started cutting at 13. So, and if we know anything about self-harm, a lot of times kids are using self-harm as a cry for help. Many times it is also something you use to combat internal pain by causing outward pain. That was my thing. And also I could hide it. It wasn't something that was overt unless you looked at my arms rather. And fast forward, I didn't process that I needed to get help because in the Black community, I don't think that we have a understanding that help is available rather than knowing to acknowledge that we need help. Because typically, I think you said this in your opening statement, there's such a level of resiliency within us. No one ever thinks to say, I need help. And I never thought to say I needed help. And even with sharing with my mother that I was struggling, my mother was a evangelist. So you just pray about it. But I knew that there was something more that I needed beyond prayer. Though prayer is a great weapon, but I'm not sure if it was the right strategy for something I was dealing with from a traumatic experience. And in my 30s, early 30s was my second attempt. And I'll fast forward. Finally, I was living with my godmother, and she said, "You have to get some help."
Wow.
And that pushed me into seeking out therapy, guidance, and I had therapists, I had a coach, I had a mentor. Like I just started looking for everything. And as the old Chinese proverb says, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Mhm.
And because I was ready to change, I believe God, in some divine way, began placing people in my pathway that would help me because I wanted to be better. Because I also had a conversation with God after my second attempt, in which was a drug overdose, and I survived. And I remember the Spirit of God speaking to me that I had to surrender the pain, that I had
Wow.
to be willing to let it go because I'm gonna be honest with you, Pastor Charlene, I didn't want to let go of the pain because here's the one thing that we forget to acknowledge is that pain is also a driver.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's a driver to how we can build things. Pain is a great motivator. However, it's not a great sustainer.
Yeah.
And though we can build things out of pain because it gives us that fuel, but eventually it's going to subside because it can't sustain you because it's exhausting to carry that weight. And
Yeah.
I think for myself, I had been carrying this since I was 13. And I remember my first day in therapy and just really just, opening up about what it felt like to be a son who was rejected by his father. And I was my dad's only son. And I carried his name and losing football because I was okay with not having him. I wasn't okay with not having him and not having football.
Okay, so you had major, major losses in your estimate. Yes.
Exactly. And oftentimes for us as men, our identity is tied to what we do because we are measured, critiqued, judged by what we do. And I had saw myself only to be a football player. And there was nothing else. And it wasn't as if I was a dumb jock because I had graduated college, but I was like, I wasn't ready for the workforce. I was like, I want to continue playing football because football gave me an outlet, which most of us as young Black males usually don't have it. And when we do, it's an unhealthy outlet.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your story and your journey, because a lot of times we say in the Christian world, our ministry used right can become our ministry, and it sounds like your misery has become your ministry in the way you reach out to others. I want to backtrack for a moment to that video because I think you touched on things I'd never heard the kind of thought about letting go of the pain, but many times people do hold on to the pain, but then sometimes we are afflicted in a way that we don't know that we're carrying the pain. So to just re-emphasize the Professor Nicholas, whose ideology in that video clip was there is a whole community of academia leaders that are given to the ideology of oppressing Africans, African Americans, Black people. So that means that we have learned as Black people, as we are resilient, but we are paining because we've had to be resilient. It's a way of surviving. But at the same time, we don't recognize that we're being overwhelmed and exhausted by the disparities, some self inflicted, but oftentimes others more imposed on us that have left lasting generational impacts on our lives. So, can you just speak to how oftentimes we're dealing with things, perhaps we can't identify what it is, but we come into spaces that cause us to feel devalued or unseen. And I think I'm learning very, very importantly, people can be okay if they know that somebody know they exist and they mean something to somebody. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. And also to give the meaning and to define transgenerational trauma, because when you think about transgenerational trauma, is what the professor of what he was speaking about. You think about the subconscious transmission of a traumatic experience into other generations and
Yes.
across generations. So when you think about that, you think about our great grandparents who had experienced a level of racism and a level of oppression that we hadn't experienced, but it was transmitted through DNA and
Yeah.
through the genes and how they were not seen that we're still not seeing in 2025. So sharing that because oftentimes what happens is when you take a people as us as Black folks who have not only fought to be seen, but there's also the fight that you have within of trying to see who you are.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a difficulty and an internal warfare all within itself. So not only are you battling not being seen by the outsiders or by your counterparts, but you're also having a difficult time of trying to see you because trauma has a unique way of rewiring your entire system, your entire molecular system. We call it neuroplasticity. It basically creating a setting that you're too blind to see yourself. So when you're looking for others to see you, many times we don't even know what we want them to see. And we just want them to see value. Well, what does value looks like? And then what is our own value? So giving that backdrop, because it's so layered when you think about an oppressive system that we are not only fighting, because no one is in slavery physically, but the oppressive system keeps you enslaved here.
Yes. Yeah. Conscious of the slavery, conscious of the oppression.
It's no different than what happened to the children of Israel.
Mhm. Mhm.
Moses get them out, they get into the wilderness and they want back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is why the scripture and Paul talks about being ye transformed by the mind.
Yeah.
If your mind is not transformed, it's hard to transform your soul.
Yeah. That's true.
It's hard to set the spirit free. When we talk about the yokes and talk about the bondage and we talk about the sin and we talk about the patterns and the behaviors and all of those different things. And so I just want to, lay that out for those that are listening, that when we speak about this battle, because that's what it feels like in most cases.
It is a battle.
It feels like
Yes.
a daily battle that you're trying to learn how to manage the pain.
Mhm.
And until you learn how to manage the pain, it's hard to even think about letting go of it because the pain is so unbearable. And as much as God was telling me to surrender it, there was a part of me wanted to continue holding to it because it did give me some sense of significance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if I let go of the pain, who do I become?
Yeah.
And
I've learned to live this way.
And that's where I believe that we're stuck at as a people. If we let go of what has been done, who are we going to become? And because no one really has a real clear, distinctive picture of what that looks like, sometimes it can be challenging to let go. Because I see this in therapy. I've asked individuals, what would it be like if you were to wake up and you weren't hurting?
That's interesting. That's interesting. I had not thought about that, but you're right, because sometimes people hold on to their misery because that's the one thing they do know. But something you said that triggered this thought with me. Isn't it interesting that when we go to the doctor, they do a medical intake and they ask you about all of your generational past, your mother, your father, your grandmother, your maternal grandparents, your siblings, and if they have any propensities towards certain sicknesses. But isn't it interesting that that society at large would think that we could have been traumatized to the very core of who we are, the existence of who we are, and nobody seems to think that that is continuing and perpetuated through our genes, through our DNA, and that we should just get over it. So I think you just hit on something, and I see that in a way. There are other psychologists and psychiatrists that have taught this, but somehow we've got to, in our people group, recognize we're painting, and some of us show it in different ways, and some of us may not feel it every day, but somewhere subliminally we're interpreting life through a lens of something that happened to
Oh,
somewhere
yeah,
in our generation. Can you talk about that?
absolutely. I'm in the process of filming a documentary titled "Healing Our Culture," and we went to Montgomery, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama, and spent some time there. And I spoke to a young lady by the name of Miss Jackie. Miss Jackie is 67 years old. She was 14 the day Bloody Sunday happened. And she was 14 when she was standing in the church. I can't recall the church name, when the white male police officer rode up on the church step with the horse, and he's beating some blacks that are trying to run in for safety. And so she says, I'm 67 and I can still see him riding up the steps.
Wow.
And I asked her, and I said, did the state, did the government, which I already knew the answer to, any other agency send any mental health help? Were there any social workers, any psychiatrists, psychologists for the trauma that had incurred through this experience? She said no. And I'm filming this in 2023, 2023. And she said, you're the first person who's asked me how I'm doing.
Wow.
And do you have to think about when this took place?
Yeah.
Early 60s.
My Lord.
50 years later. And her eyes are watering. She had a sister who was 17 at the time. And this is to answer your question. And she said, it's hard to get over because even the people here in Selma act like it never happened.
Do you think that's kind of an escapism mentality to just avoid it?
For the whites, it is.
Uh-huh.
And particularly for whites that feel that they were not a part of it. However, healing doesn't start until someone feels heard.
You're right.
And what you see with us is this constant outcry that we're in pain, that slavery impacted us for generations, that the system has not worked for us. Also, that the oppressive infrastructure has not made it any better in today's society, though there's not the dogs that are being sent on us. There's no fire hydrants being turned on. There's no, get out of here, only whites, no colors allowed. Though it's not that. However, there is a individual system, invisible system, that is still in place, that we still have to be a part of this circus to try to feel like, well, I have to hop on this stage, I have to perform, because if I don't perform, I can't benefit from a system that was never created for me to win. So all of these psychological aerobics are exhausting. And because we're saying, I'm hurting and I can't let it go. And part of letting it go is somebody acknowledging, I hurt you.
Yeah. Wow. My Lord. Couldn't that begin a windfall of healing for so many people? I personally believe that oftentimes the abandonment and the abuse in our homes are directly related to those events that happened in our forefathers that was transmitted to us. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And it's created such cognitive distortions, which is when you begin to perceive your reality inaccurately. And you think about those 9 distortions. One of the things is overly generalizing. One of those things is that we make everything according to what our experiences have been. It doesn't allow you to show up authentically because there's also a weight. There's also a lens that doesn't show you a different picture. It only shows the picture that has been programmed in your mind to see. So you're having to try to overcome implicit and explicit biases, things that were told to others about you, and then things that were shown to others about you. So sometimes there's no direct correlation that you had an experience with a Black person. Oh, well, I read this and they said all Blacks do this. Well, I heard my mom say Blacks, are not to be trusted. And to think about the mental exercises that is constantly being done, because I don't think anyone considers to be free, but to still be bound.
Yeah.
No one considered that though I have freedom, but I'm still incarcerated, even in
Yeah.
my thoughts.
Yeah. And in my soul, where I interpret life, everything,
Wow.
my affections and everything is impacted because I can't just, and you use the word authentic. I came into this probably back in 2012. I heard a message by a gentleman who was actually, I think, out of the UK. And he was not, I think he became an American citizen, but he was a native of another country and maybe the UK. And he said, Derek Prince is his name. He's known as a very profound, very simple but profound teacher. And he said, Blacks have been emancipated from slavery, and that's true to some extent, I guess, but we're no longer in the shackles. But he said, but we've never been freed in the spirit. And I heard that in something in 2012, and it started me on somewhat probably 2006, then again in 2012. I had these moments with the Lord that my heart was encountered that there's more to what we do as Black people, going to church, and I am a minister and have been, and I love and serve the Lord and serve His people. But I recognize we are shortchanging ourselves and each other because in everything we show up with, we're not as authentic as we could be. We have a layer or a preconceived notion in our mind about ourselves and about each other that has been imposed on us through the culture.
Yeah. Trauma.
Yeah. Trauma.
Trauma.
Exactly. So even when we see each other, sometimes we can't celebrate or really see each other because it's too painful to think about what happened or what I'm not experiencing. I can't relieve myself to celebrate you and possibly see that it could be you and me, not you versus me.
Your trauma, won't allow you to see freely. It's going to always have you seeing from a very limited view in a limited perspective because your sight is always attached to your experience. Your sight is always attached to your frame of thinking. Your sight is attached to whatever societal norms or environment norms or family norms that has been constructed and allowed you to be shaped and developed in. That's why the healing that we need is so layered. And um, thank God for the pandemic, because I think without the pandemic, and some would say, and let me say this, and I think God is so unique because without George Floyd passing, I don't think we ever stop to think that we truly need help.
Yeah.
Now, I was emerging as a Black therapist during this time and making social media posts about grief and all of those different things after Kobe passed. And then my stuff just exploded after George Floyd because people's like, wow, we've never seen a Black man who's former athlete that is speaking his way about mental health so freely and open and sharing. And I thought about this because God had gave me something back in 2015 before I started grad school. He spoke to me in my office that I was working in a group home with girls who were victims of sex trafficking, and they were girls who were part of the foster care system. And I created a program called Emotional Recovery Program. Most of these girls were high risk. Their behavior levels were elevated. And in the group home setting in foster care, when you have a high risk, you don't get the same benefits as the other kids. And so you kind of you're not treated like an outsider, but there's much cautious around you because of the behavior issues, and a lot of it was trauma. And it wasn't until Alicia Jarrett, and I always say her name because she's forever etched into my journey of going back to school. She said, "You should really consider being a therapist." She said, "The work that you're doing with these girls as a Black man, I've never seen it." And I was like, well, I don't know. So I'm just doing, I felt led to create this program. I love young people always. And go home and I just start praying. And God spoke to me as clear as day. He said, go to school. Something is coming and you're going to be needed.
Wow.
2020 happens. George Floyd passed.
Yeah.
I write the Just Heal Bro book encouraging Black men and Black folks to begin seeking therapy because all of the secondary trauma that we have incurred, and not just with George Floyd. You think about Tamir Rice. You think
Yes.
about Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor.
About Mike, I think was it Mike Brown.
Brown. Michael
Mike Brown.
Brown.
You think
Yeah.
about all of
Maud
these different
Arbery. Yeah. Yeah.
all of these different things. That's secondary trauma
Yeah.
that is impacting not only how we see ourselves, but it impacts your body physically.
Yeah.
Having to constantly try to be resilient while you're watching people do things that simply, and it impacts you.
And I'm living in a heightened state of now, will I be harmed, or will my loved ones, when they leave home, be harmed, or can they just be an innocent bystander and be mistaken to be a villain or something?
Yes.
That's very true.
Yes. And then to think about, we have to move on as business as usual.
Yeah.
There's no time to process. I mean, you think something happened and corporations didn't think about this, that, listen, man, I just saw a Black man with a knee on his neck and this guy crying for his mother. And we just go, oh, well, he stole something.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
where's humanity?
Yeah.
And when you see this and you think about, this is not only happening in 2020, but you got to think about, my grandparents were alive during Bloody Sunday. They were alive during the assassination of Dr. King, the assassination of Malcolm X. Then they were children of the Great Depression. God knows what that was like. So you have all of this trauma that is living in your body, and no one is speaking to us to free us. And God says, I'm going to use you and use your story.
Wow.
And I'll be honest with you, that was not on my radar to be no therapist, not on my radar to be no spokesperson. I was okay with that. I had a okay career. I was an amazing college athlete. My jersey's been retired. I was okay with saying, God, let me just kind of go do something over here. But there was a calling, because healing has to begin in the mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Pastor Charlene, when we're studying mental health, it was not considered for Blacks. In fact, one white therapist who was a pioneer in mental health did not think Blacks needed therapy.
Why not?
Because of our level of resiliency because of slavery.
Wow.
He said Blacks do not need therapy. And let me tell you something for those that are listening. I had a student, a colleague, well, not colleague, student say in class that Blacks don't go to therapy, they go to jail. And believe it or not, the largest mental health provider is
the jail.
The jail.
Oh my Lord.
So when you think about that, you think about not only the trauma, but you think about the levels of unprocessed pain that our men are holding. And when you think about the unprocessed pain that men are holding, you think about the behavior and the pain that has been carried out on the women. And now these women have gave birth to children. And now you have children that are being raised in such anger and such unsettling environments where it's dysfunction, there's no love, and there's violence, because when you have violence, it's because there is no peace. There is no rest. Souls are unsettled. And when people are unstable in their thinking, one or two things are happening. they're either becoming homicidal or they will become suicidal.
Yeah. I've learned that in working with people, Dr. J. Wow, I mean, you have, my goodness, I don't even know where to go from here. You've said so much because it's so, so true. And let's do this. What is it? How can, because I believe this with everything in me, I believe the health of our Black men is the key to the restoration of our Black families. I believe this. I was listening to something by Dr. George Fraser, and he talked about the decline in the not African American family. We're at the lowest rung of the ladder in every social sector in society. What can Black men that have the sense of responsibility and a call to action to heal our Black communities? Because this is what I know for a fact. Nobody can do what needs to be done in the Black community like the Black people. Nobody knows our pain, our story, our culture, and they can't empathize to the point that they can provide resources, information, but we are the healer, the agents for healing inside of our culture. How? Who? Call them to attention. How do we create this movement, this mobilization, Dr. J?
So I want to. I'm going to go two directions. I'm going to start spiritual first because I believe a lot of Black men wrestle with the same challenges that Gideon wrestled with in the Bible. Number one, a lot of Black men are wrestling with fear. Gideon had such a fear that he was afraid of the Midianites. And I believe so many Black men are afraid of stepping out. They are afraid of the system. And we have to move beyond the fear and know that we have to break the system. The system is perpetual. The system has to be broken. In fact, the system is a cycle that is turning like a wash cycle. It's just spinning. It's just spinning. And no matter what you throw in it, it doesn't stop spinning. And it's not going to stop until somebody come and disrupt the system. Secondly,
Can I add a point to what you just said about Gideon? Because one of the things God did for Gideon, he called him what he was, not what he felt. Not Gideon. So he called him a mighty man of valor. What can we do to help our brothers see themselves outside of the lens of fear and trauma and rejection and defeat? What can we do to ignite this?
really to really begin calling brothers as we see them and not as they are. And you made a great point. God spoke to what he saw in Gideon, not what Gideon saw in himself. Even with his doubt, he needed God to do all of these different miracles. And I think so many times we're waiting for a savior, and God is saying, I put it in you.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, like when I speak to Black men, I call them good brothers because I want them to know that they are a good brother. How you doing, good brother? And I'm seeing that it's traveling the airways. Like guys hit me up on Instagram, and they'll be like, "Good brother, man, how you doing, man?" And partially for that reason, most Black men have never been called anything good. I want people to really think about this. I toured this country with my book, Just Heal Bro, which is available on Amazon, a book for men and a journal. I toured this country, 33 cities in 3 years and 18,000 men. The amount of stories that I heard from men saying, I've never heard a man speak to me the way you did to us tonight. I didn't know I had anything good in me. I didn't know that I was capable of anything. Because when you're in an oppressive system, it produces oppressive people. Oppressive people become a depressive people. So I don't see in me what I don't see in myself. I call you a good brother because I'm a good brother, not because I'm a perfect brother, but the healing and the work that I've done and being able to see that I wasn't what happened to me. I was what I decided to become. And that was changing my mind, that I could no longer allow the trauma to tell the story.
Wow.
And when I began helping men break that thought process, because see, the enemy job is to stay in control of your
Your
thinking.
mind. Yes.
As a man thinketh, so is he. So it's important for us to begin speaking to them even when they can't see it. The more they hear it, I'll never forget that when God began sending men in my life to begin to speak to the little boy, to speak to the son in me, I began feeling that I could. So I was no longer operating in inadequacy, because so many men feel that they're not capable. And when you feel you're not capable, you won't.
Wow.
And there's no worse of a place than a man to be in than a place of hopelessness.
Yeah. And I want to put a pin there to have you speak to this. So that speaks to oftentimes why our men either won't commit or they flounder in relationships, because they automatically come in feeling I'm going to fail, I am a failure, or I'm not adequate. Speak to that again, please, and just put a punctuation point there.
Well, because how do you expect me to think up when all of my thoughts are down? And we're asking men to come in and to be leaders. We're asking men to come in and be visionaries. We're asking them to come in and be priests, to be protectors. And I'm intentionally not mentioning providing, because providing is really just a small aspect if you got a man thinking that his provision monetarily is everything. No, it's having men that are emotionally available.
Yes.
It's having men who are emotionally competent enough to not only be self-aware about their own emotion, but also how to be aware of the emotion of others. That's what's important in a relationship. And
Yes,
when
very
you're
much
not,
so.
and when you're not aware within self, you don't know how to show up for others, which is why
So
you
you
have a lot
can't
of men
even be
who are
present.
creative.
That man can't even be present even in the moment that he's in. Wow.
Because what happened is, I only know how to create, but I don't know how to build something. So
Wow.
I know how to make a baby, but I don't know how to build a family. I know how to get started, but I don't know how to finish it.
Wow.
I know how to talk a good game, but I don't know how to commit to something. And many times these attributes that these men lack is because they were underdeveloped emotionally. And I tell brothers, when you get into therapy and you begin to breaking down these strongholds of thinking and breaking down these behavior patterns, it allows you to begin at ground level. That who were you before you got hurt? Who were you before daddy left? Who were you before you were abandoned? Who were you before the molestation, before your innocence was taken? Because that's the real you. And what happens is so many men hold to maladaptive personas, meaning that this happened, so I'm going to carry this persona on, and this is what I'm going to show up as. But when you get them behind when you get behind the veil, you see this is just a hurt little boy.
Wow.
And we have to start speaking to the little boys in men, the inner child. There's so many men that I've counseled that are in their 50s and they're really 12, because you don't outgrow the experience of the
It's
trauma.
arrested development from that trauma. My Lord.
And it stays with you. You may grow, but the trauma continues to go with you. And getting men to just stop. I'm not telling you to stop working, but I am telling you to stop running from you.
Yeah. Say
Stop
it again.
running.
Say it again, Dr. J. Say to our brothers,
Stop
stop.
running. Face it. One of the things that my therapist said to me, you can no longer run from you and blame your father.
Wow.
And that's what we've learned to do, is to place blame. And my therapist said to me, you have a choice. You can either keep telling the same story or you can create a new story. And one day I said, Pastor Charlene, I said, man, I said, I really want to know what it's like to not keep telling the same story.
Mhm.
That curiosity, which leads me to 3 points that I want to leave with people who are pursuing healing. Number one, it takes intention.
So
It
you got to
takes
be intentional. Yes.
intentionality. Number
Yes.
two, it's going to take it's a communal effort. You
So
need a
you,
community. What
mhm.
you're doing right here, this is community.
Yeah.
This is like watching healing takes place in real time in the conversation. The
Yeah.
other part is curiosity. You have to be curious about rewriting the story and creating a new narrative.
Wow.
And I had such curiosity that I was really interested in becoming something that I didn't even know what I was becoming. Because I watched 7 uncles. My dad has 7 brothers. I watched 7 uncles who were amazing athletes, big, strong, tall men, but no one was emotionally available to their families and kids.
Wow.
I've listened to my cousins and I've listened to the conversation like, yeah, daddy don't talk, man. We don't know nothing about his childhood. And then we all get to have these conversations. And then we find out what our grandfather was and who he was and how he was big on legacy, but also he had this very tainted history
Mhm.
of the pain that he caused my grandmother, and not seeing how that pain was moving through every son
Every
because,
son.
because the sins of the father.
Yeah. Those
This
iniquities passed down.
They're
Wow.
passed down. And
Mhm.
what men don't realize, we get to determine what moves through the generations. And
Lord,
until
I can hear the Lord saying He has need of you. Our community has need of you and brothers like you, because for Black women, we're the backbone. We're going to push, we're going to fight, but we cannot be a man or do what a man can do. And I
right,
am so just. I said to you in our first conversation, I said, "Son," because you're old enough. I'm old enough to be your mother, and yeah, I think your mother and I are around the same age. But I say that with affection because I am so godly proud of you, Dr. J, and I'm so thankful that and praying the Lord crossed our paths because we never heard of each other. And for the insight that you have, I want to close out with this. We talked about being so fatigued that we become apathetic toward ourselves, where we just don't want to get up and do anything. Would you close out with that? And then I want to have a conversation offline, and I want all our listeners to say that yes, he needs to accept another invitation. We need to build this out. I have some brothers, brethren in the faith, and brothers, biological brothers, as well as men of God, that I'd love to bring in and just do a session, have you just come in and talk with them, because um, as a woman and as a pastor and a spiritual leader for many, many years, I've sat on the other end and I've seen the little boy, and I've been able to, as a nurturer, bring comfort, encouragement, see the tears, feel the pain, but I couldn't model and I couldn't speak back into them as a man. And I believe that this is the finest, the oppression that we see coming upon our people, Black
yeah,
people in particular, is a sign that Pharaoh's stronghold is going to be broken. And that burden in Exodus, when God said, let my people go, and Pharaoh made them work twice as hard, but God was not to deliverance. And I believe He's going to raise up deliverers, people like yourself and others,
yeah,
Black men, Black women, and people, but Black people in particularly, to come back and bring healing into our communities. So would you talk about the apathy and how do we begin to get over the apathy? You gave us some points about our men, but just Black people overall, we're exhausted, we're traumatized, all of that. But how do we begin to recognize that we're apathetic toward ourselves and we don't want to get up and do anything. And then how do we start moving out of that?
I think the first thing that I think is important is to acknowledge your humanity. And I
You
want to
say
say,
that again, because somehow in the faith, we lose our humanity and we try to operate superhuman. I'm guilty of that. But the truth is, you live in a flesh body, you're going to have to deal
yeah,
with your
yeah.
humanity.
You have to acknowledge your humanity. And I think when you look at Jesus, he was one of the most balanced individuals that you've seen. And I've studied much of him from a psychotherapy's lens. And I look at the moments that he retreated. And I think it's important for brothers and for our sisters to understand that you are a human being and you can't continue to dishonor who you are as a man or as a woman. And let me say this: just because you're acknowledging your humanity, that's not an indictment on God. He actually needs you to acknowledge that to understand the full experience of the capacity that God, this is heavy.
Yeah.
And because this is heavy, I have to relinquish this. And relinquishing something could be picking up the phone and getting in touch with your community, and build community outside of church, because you need people who are going to hold space for you, and not holding space for you to exploit it, but holding space to you to allow you to properly process and heal. Number two, secondly, stop dishonoring your feelings.
Oh, wow.
And so, because believers, we do what we call spiritual bypassing. Yes, there are some things that are going to happen that it is the act of God, it is God's will. But stop. So let me give you an example, people, of spiritual bypassing for those who may not. It is when you avoid feelings and emotion and you begin to replace it with scriptures in layman terms. For an
Yeah.
example, I think it's the worst thing. And I told my father this. I said, Pop, I said, man, going to funerals with Black folks in church, man, it's just like, it makes my flesh crawls. I said, I cringe when I hear somebody say, y'all be strong. He's with the Lord now. This doesn't minimize the grief, sir, ma'am.
Yeah.
Let me feel the weight of it. I know the scriptures say to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. But what we're doing is, when you give people scripture, you're dismissing their emotions.
Their feelings. They're
You're
hurting.
dismissing
Yeah.
their pain of grief. And so now you have people who don't grieve properly. And when you don't grieve properly, you live in a cycle of repetitive grief popping up here and there. Grieve. And the grief doesn't have to mean that you lost somebody in death. The divorce, that's a grief. My child is going off to college, that's grief. Grief is the end of a thing. Right now, you may be a part of this administration, and I am praying that God give you strategy, that God gives you wisdom on what is your next. But if your job ended, that's grief. So don't say, well, no, sometimes we have to sit it in it. And what we think as people, believers, sitting in it means I don't trust God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sitting in it means that you're acknowledging that God created you as a man or a woman. Stop spiritualizing everything and then finding yourself in these mental breakdowns because you're avoiding your humanity, and you're spiritualizing it and realizing that you can't outrun who you are as a human being.
That's so, that
And this
is,
doesn't take any way. God is still God.
yeah. It doesn't diminish God at all. As a matter of fact, I found God can't come to me until I bring me to him, because oftentimes we're presenting a facade to him. It's like, I'm not dealing with that. That's not who you really are. So,
Yeah.
oh my Lord, this is so, so rich. We're beyond our time, but
Yeah,
I know that
I want to make sure I give you enough to yeah.
you have a smorgasbord. You have given an overflow. Oh, you're a blessing. Thank you. Um, Wow, there's just so much more. There's a lot that we didn't even get to dive in, but I believe the direction you went was what the Lord would have us address at this particular time. We're going to put your information out, but if someone's looking for a therapist, maybe they got freed by hearing you say, be human and get the help you need. Yes, go to God, but then let God navigate you to get practical help if that's what you need. What are two things you would look for in a therapist? That somebody says, hey, I want to try talking to somebody. What do I need to, how do I vet that person?
I think the first way to vet a therapist, I'm going to say this: finding a good therapist or an effective therapist is like dating. It may take you a few times, and I know sometimes that can be discouraging, but you want to be careful to not always be opening up when you enter into the session. Make sure you're asking questions. Hey, have you worked with Black people before? Have you worked with Black people, Blacks that have shared their experience from dealing with societal racism? Ask questions to make sure that they're cultural competent, make sure that they're cultural sensitive, and that they're also cultural aware of the Black experience. Because you can work with some clinicians that may not look like you, but make sure that they have the proper skill set. And even when you're working with somebody that look like you, because Black is not monolithic. So we all don't have the same experience. A Black man from the South is different from the Black man from the North. So the experience is going to be different. So be sure to ask questions before you begin unpacking, because part of therapy is also the relationship that you build with the clinician, with the therapist. And I think the biggest challenge for us, Pastor Charlene, is 86% of psychologists and psychiatrists and therapists across the country are white, trying to service a population of Blacks that make up 13%.
That they have no
They have
way of relating to the
no,
experience. Yeah.
no way.
That's why I believe we have healing within our community for each other. We have collective progress together, because we understand we have some shared experiences, pains, traumas, and victories. We're going to close out on that, because my producer's going to probably put both of us out of the studio at this point. He's already texted me, said, this is powerful. Thank you.
Wow.
But, Dr. J, this has been such a robust and meaningful conversation centered on Black mental health and wellness. And I just thank you for adding the value. You were God's choice for this particular segment of our Black History podcast and the educational forum that we wanted to present. Not just remembering our past, but building from that. And you're a builder. You're a builder. So thank you for that. Any final thing you want to say as we close out?
I was going to say this, Pastor Glover, thank you for your beautiful spirit, and just for your light that you're sharing with the world and sharing with your audience. It's humbling to sit at the feet of individuals like yourself that I feel that are pioneers. I love to glean from our Blacks that are seasoned, that have gone before, that have laid the foundation. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to share in your wisdom and to share in your light. I think it's beautiful that we can connect and bridge the gap between generations. And I think that's another thing that needs to constantly be done, is bridging the gap and not having it separate. And as I tell Black men that are 50 plus who often feel that they don't have any life left, I tell them, you have the wisdom, I have the stamina. Together we can go the distance. And and I think that's what we need to continue to do, is to continue to push each other to go the distance. And you're doing that. So thank you for allowing me to be on your platform today.
Thank you for your kindness. Let's commit, as the Lord says the same. Let's come back. Let's talk offline. And I think there's so many things that I carry in my heart. And you're right, because John said, young men have the strength, the old men or the older women have the vision. And I think that our community is needing that gap to be bridged between the generations, because we're all painting. And now, as a baby boomer, what I grew up with grandparents is not what is required today by grandchildren. So there's some that feel, grandparents that feel that they're obsolete, and they're not. So Bless you. Would you mind just saying a closing prayer over to just
Yes.
bless our audience, please?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Lord, thank you for this time. I thank you, God, for Pastor Charlene for creating this platform, this mission, celebrating Black history, but also, God, celebrating the progressiveness that is taking place as we're beginning to heal. And I thank you for the minds and for the spirit and the hearts of those that are going to be listening. I pray that this word, this insight, Father, and this wisdom take root and encourage them to begin their journey, seeking more of themselves, Father. And I even pray that it begins a journey for them to draw closer to you and that you meet them on their journey to heal, Father. And I thank you, God, for you have a great future in plan for us, Father. And that is to see us succeed and to see our soul prospering as well as we are in good health. And Father, I thank you that this broadcast, Father, do above all that we may imagine. And we will give you the glory and the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Amen.
You've been listening to Dr. J, mental health therapist. His contact information is on the screen. Reach out and make sure that you get his books found on Amazon.com. He has a book on Just Heal Bro. I would encourage every Black man and boy who's in the journey and on the quest for inner healing and soul healing to secure those resources. And I want to say that we're planning to come back, as the Lord says the same, and we can connect our schedules to reach out into our community. I'm a problem solver. I'm not one to look at a problem and wonder who's going to respond to it. If it becomes a problem and it's in my space and I can see it in my heart and envision being a part of resolving it, I feel called to it. And Black people, all people are important. All people are important to God. We're all created in the image and likeness of God, the Imago Dei. But right now on my forefront radar is African American and Black people, because I believe it is a move of God that is emerging. I'm going to be a part of the healing and the health of our community. And I'm calling on all of you who carry that burden as well to let's rise up and be the change agents that we need to be our best and to be instruments that can bring our next generation farther than what we've come. God bless you. You've been listening to WNAVA. We Need a Village Again. We're better together. Our 2025 Black History podcast, honoring our history, leveraging our legacy, and we are reshaping our future. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to donate, if this podcast has been beneficial to you, WNAVA, We Need a Village Again, is a self-supported nonprofit agency or organization. Feel free to donate to this agency or to this organization so that we can continue to bring you meaningful content. Also, to encourage our students in tutorial programs, educational programs, and empowerment for all of our people. Thank you and God bless.